Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that smells of incense and damp stone, where the echo of chanting monks rolls against high arches and torchlight flickers across the carved faces of saints. The year is 2072, and you are standing in a draughty corridor of a royal palace somewhere in Europe, where the air is thick with politics, perfume and secrets. The queen sits behind those carved oak doors, veiled in silk, her crown catching the candle's glow, her eyes scanning the chamber like a hawk among doves. The court around her is buzzing. Ministers bicker, knights clank, scribes scratch quills into parchment, but under it all lies a tension you can almost taste. It's the kind of tension that suggests power isn't quite secure, that rivals are waiting for a stumble, and that even the smallest misstep could cost her crown. You probably won't survive this if you breathe too loudly. If you want more scandal-soaked royal stories like the queen who slept with her priest, make sure to subscribe. It keeps these forbidden confessions alive in the shadows. Drop your location and local time below in the comments, so I know when and where you're sneaking into this tale from. And remember, keep your secrets safe, unlike our queen. Now, you pull closer into the chamber itself. The queen is not just a decorative monarch, not just a pawn of marriage or lineage. She has clawed her way here, through inheritance laws bent to breaking point, through bloodlines contested by brothers, cousins, and ambitious dukes who would happily see her dethroned. Her coronation had not been a glittering parade of unquestioned authority. It was a battlefield of parchments, signatures, oaths, and veiled threats. The very fact she wears the crown unsettles many of her subjects. You see the nobles glance sideways at one another during her audiences, eyebrows lifted, whispers darting like mice in the corners of the hall. A queen who reigns in her own right. Well, that rattles the old order. Kings were supposed to be stern, armoured, decisive. Queens, in the eyes of tradition, were supposed to be decorative, fertile, and obedient. She is none of these stereotypes. She has chosen advisers on merit rather than family, dismissed those who undermined her, and asserted control over taxation, military appointments, and the royal treasury. Still, even as she radiates command, you can sense the constant precariousness of her throne. Every decision she makes, from the raising of a tax to the appointment of a steward, could be turned against her as evidence of overstepping or incompetence. A man might be forgiven for harshness or extravagance. For her, such things are twisted into proof of a woman's unsuitability to rule. Now you follow her during a royal procession. The streets are muddy, lined with cheering peasants who raise their caps, toss sprigs of herbs, and cross themselves as she passes. The queen rides beneath a canopy of embroidered silk, but even here, surrounded by pomp, you catch sight of the hostility. A few mouths remain grimly shut, a few banners dip half-heartedly, and you notice an unmoving figure in a window, staring down with eyes that promise opposition rather than loyalty. At night, the queen sits alone at her writing desk, the candle burning low. The crown rests beside her, not on her head, but close enough to remind her of its weight. Her letters to allies must be carefully phrased, balancing requests for aid with shows of strength. Marriage offers pour in from foreign courts. Her body, her hand, still viewed as a commodity that could unite kingdoms, but she refuses them, at least for now. She wants to rule, not to become an appendage of some husband's dynasty. The irony does not escape you. She commands armies, judges disputes, oversees lands that stretch beyond the horizon. Yet at the same time, her very legitimacy is treated as fragile because of her gender. This is not a fairy tale throne, but a wooden chair balanced on knives. The nobles test her constantly. One day they bring her petitions dripping with flattery. Another day they stir rebellion in distant provinces. You hear her voice in council, firm and unwavering, but you also catch the occasional tremor, a note of fatigue, of someone who knows her enemies multiply in the dark. And then there are the clergy. The church watches closely, not only because kings and queens are supposed to serve God, but because priests, bishops and abbots hold real political leverage. The queen's piety must be beyond doubt. She must attend mass, sponsor monasteries and confess her sins regularly. If she stumbles in faith, the clergy could strip her of legitimacy, brand her a Jezebel, and unleash holy thunder against her reign. This is the stage upon which her story begins. A throne taken but never fully secure, a woman's crown gleaming but always under threat of being toppled, a court filled with ambition, whispers, and the scent of both incense and blood, and into this fragile order steps the figure who will both steady and destroy her, her priest. But for now, in this first glimpse, you only see her alone, seated at her desk, quill scratching. She pauses, presses her fingertips to her temples, and breathes deep. Outside, the watchmen call the hours, and the palace settles into uneasy silence. Tomorrow will bring fresh demands, new challenges, and though she does not yet know it, the dangerous comfort of a confessor whose presence will upend everything. She pushes the crown farther away from her parchment, as though resenting its weight even when unworn. Her hand lingers on the crucifix around her neck, lips moving in a whispered prayer, and then the candle gutters, plunging the chamber into shadow. You said. Continue. ChatGPT said. Section 2. The morning bells drag you from uneasy slumber. Their clangor isn't gentle, it's iron against iron. A sound that rattles across the city roofs, waking bakers, market hawkers, and even the palace pigeons before the sun has fully burned through the mist. You follow the queen into her daily routine, though it's less routine and more performance. Every step of her morning is meant to remind the court who she is, the sovereign, the centre of gravity, the jewel of the kingdom. Servants enter her chamber at dawn, arms heavy with embroidered gowns. You watch them layer her body like a painting being built in brushstrokes. First linen camise, then silk kirtle, then the heavier overdress woven with threads of gold. Jewels are pinned, hair is coiled, and perfume imported from the Levant, expensive enough to buy a peasant's freedom, spills into the air. You half joke to yourself that her morning prep makes your average influencer's skincare routine look lazy. Once robed, the queen steps into the audience chamber. The hall is lined with courtiers already sweating under heavy fabrics, their stomachs growling for breakfast, but their mouths full of rehearsed compliments. You notice the way each noble bows, some too low, desperate for favour, some not low enough, testing boundaries. Her throne sits raised on a dais, polished wood gleaming beneath her, and there she perches, perfectly poised, her hands resting lightly as though she has all the time in the world. This is not relaxation, it's calculated theatre. Every minute gesture is scrutinized. If her smile lingers too long on one ambassador, gossip will whisper of alliances. If she frowns, it will be interpreted as judgment, insult, or even policy. She must tread a tightrope of expression where nothing is free, nothing is private. You wonder how exhausting it must be to live with your face as a political weapon. The petitions begin. Nobles kneel, clerks read scrolls, voices drone. One asks for tax relief after a poor harvest, another demands more men to defend a border. Each supplicant uses elaborate titles, metaphors, and references to saints to sweeten their requests. The queen listens, her face unreadable, offering occasional nods. Sometimes she interjects with sharp questions. How many men? Which fields? What guarantees? You sense that she thrives on these moments, cutting through flattery to practical detail. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is taken publicly. A platter of bread, cheese, figs, and watered wine is placed before her, though she eats sparingly. You can't help but think she must be starving, but appearances matter. Gluttony would be mocked. Instead, she breaks bread with dignified precision, a gesture both humble and symbolic. Her courtiers pretend not to stare as she raises the cup, though you catch eyes flickering toward her every movement. Once the petitions end, it's time for ceremony. You walk with her to the chapel within the palace, a space drenched in candlelight and echoing with chants. Here the queen kneels, surrounded by clergy. The scent of incense mixes with wax smoke. Her prayers are spoken softly, but you hear the rustle of fabric as dozens of attendants bow behind her. Even her act of devotion is political theatre. To be queen means to demonstrate holiness on cue, to kneel gracefully while the entire court watches. Yet as she bows, you sense the tension in her shoulders. Her lips move, but you can't tell if the words are truly for God or for the people watching. She is not free to pray as a woman. She prays as a symbol, every whispered confession bound by expectation. Back in her private chamber, another performance begins. Letters. She dictates to scribes who crouch with quills ready. Missives are sent to neighboring rulers, to generals, to bishops. Each line must balance authority with diplomacy. You marvel at how much of her life is spent managing words crafted like weapons, polished like jewels. By mid-afternoon, the queen walks through the palace gardens. Sunlight filters through trellises, bees hum lazily, and roses climb the walls. But don't be fooled. This isn't leisure. Every stroll is staged with carefully chosen companions. Today it's the Duchess whose loyalty is wavering. Tomorrow the ambassador she needs to flatter. Even here, where nature blooms, politics clings like ivy. And then come the lessons. She summons her son, a boy of 9 with restless eyes. Tutors bow and present books. Latin, scripture, law. The queen listens as the boy recites passages, correcting him gently but firmly. You see her determination. The survival of her dynasty depends not just on her but on him. If he falters, her enemies will pounce. Dinner, when it arrives, is hardly private. Long trestle tables grown with roasted meats, spice stews, and exotic fruits. Minstrels play lutes, jesters crack jokes, and servants scurry with pitchers. The queen sits at the head, smiling politely, laughing at the right cues. You notice, though, that her laughter doesn't quite reach her eyes. She's calculating still, watching who sits close together, who whispers, who avoids her gaze. This isn't relaxation, it's reconnaissance with better food. By nightfall, exhaustion must weigh heavy. But even then, the queen does not retreat into true solitude. Her bedchamber fills with ladies in waiting, attendants, guards. They chatter, fold linens, whisper news. Privacy is a myth. You imagine how suffocating it must be, to live surrounded by people yet still be alone, a queen in name and prisoner in practice. It's here, in this grind of duty and theatre, that her vulnerability lies. To endure such endless scrutiny, she will eventually crave a moment of authenticity, someone to speak to without performance, and when that someone comes robed in priestly black, with ears ready for confession and lips ready with absolution, well, that's a dangerous recipe. For now, though, you leave her at the close of day, her crown resting on a velvet cushion, her eyes heavy but alert. Tomorrow will bring another round of performance, another exhausting climb up the mountain of expectation. The stage is set, the actors are ready, and she, the queen, must play her part until the curtain finally rips. The chapel smells of candle wax and incense, and you can hear the shuffle of sandals on flagstones as the clergy take their places. You walk with the queen beneath the high vaults, the carved saints peering down like watchmen. Here, in this space, the rhythm of her reign collides directly with the authority of the church, and it is not an equal collision. You feel it immediately. The weight of the cross outweighs the weight of the crown, at least in the eyes of many. Priests hover everywhere at court. Some are confessors, others chaplains, others advisors skilled in law or finance. The church is not simply a spiritual refuge, it's an institution braided into the very fabric of governance. A bishop might control more land than a duke, an abbot might command more loyalty than a general. For the queen, managing these holy men is as critical as keeping nobles in line. You notice how they circle her throne in subtle ways. A priest might bow with extraordinary depth, then whisper a suggestion about a disputed tax. Another might raise a theological question in council, cleverly disguising a political jab. The queen listens, nods, and replies with calm courtesy, but you sense the strain. Unlike noble rivals, she cannot simply exile or behead troublesome priests. They carry the aura of divine authority. Even hinting at hostility toward them could trigger accusations of heresy. One figure in particular draws your gaze, the court confessor. Every monarch has one, a man chosen to hear sins, soothe doubts, and provide spiritual counsel. It's an intimate relationship, more so than any between ruler and minister, for in confession, walls collapse. The queen is not just a sovereign there, she is a soul laid bare. You realize this dynamic is both her greatest solace and her greatest risk. The clergy's role expands beyond chapel walls. They oversee charity, hospitals, and schools, ensuring the Queen's reputation for piety spreads through the kingdom. When she funds the repair of a monastery roof or the copying of sacred texts, word spreads in villages faster than political decrees ever could. And when a priest blesses her actions in public, the seal of heaven seems to rest upon her crown. But there's a darker edge. You overhear conversations in the corridors, murmurs of papal influence, of Rome's heavy hand on local rulers, of priests who act as informants to higher powers. Every word the Queen speaks to her confessors might travel farther than she intends. Trust in this sacred relationship is always shadowed by fear. During Mass, she kneels while the confessor's voice rolls through the Latin verses. His tone is steady, low, commanding. You can see why people hang on his words. There's a cadence that slips easily into the ears, half music, half command. When he raises the host, the congregation bows, even the Queen lowers her gaze. The priest becomes in that moment higher than royalty, holding God in his hands. You watch how carefully she performs reverence. Her fingers trace the sign of the cross with elegance. Her lips murmur prayers with precision. To falter would be to invite scandal. You almost want to joke that her piety is Instagram perfect, curated for maximum impact. But here the stakes are far deadlier than online comments. One misplaced gesture, one whispered accusation of lukewarm faith, and her enemies would swarm. Beyond ritual, priests also act as moral mirrors. They are expected to remind the Queen of humility, to caution her against arrogance, to tug gently at her conscience when power tempts her toward cruelty. Sometimes you wonder if they relish this authority, telling a queen that she must bow her head, repent and accept their absolution. It's a dynamic laced with both holiness and domination. In council too, their voices rise. Priests argue over military campaigns, whether they are just wars or sinful aggressions. They weigh in on marriage treaties, citing scripture as though God himself had strong opinions on dowries. They even weigh in on wardrobe, reminding the Queen to dress modestly despite the pressure to dazzle foreign ambassadors. Imagine being scolded by a priest for your neckline while you're trying to negotiate a peace treaty. And yet, for all this intrusion, she leans on them. Their presence affirms her legitimacy. Without their blessing, her crown is just a piece of gold. With it, her reign becomes sanctified. This is the paradox that traps her. She needs the priests to stand, but their shadow constantly threatens to eclipse her light. You begin to sense how dangerous intimacy with one priest might be. If the clergy as a body are her constant judges, then singling out one of them, trusting him more than the rest, invites both suspicion and dependence. And once dependence enters the heart, the line between spiritual comfort and personal desire begins to blur. The confessor stands at the edge of the chapel, his black robe pooling like spilled ink around his boots. You watch him from the shadows of the choir stalls as the Queen lifts her veil, her gaze brushing across the crowd, then catching his. For a moment, something flickers. Curiosity, maybe recognition, maybe something more subtle, but it is there, like a candle flame in the dark. He is not the aged, stooped priest you expected. Instead, his presence is magnetic. His voice is smooth, measured, each syllable shaped as though carved for permanence. You hear him speak to the congregation, quoting scripture, and even you, jaded by repetition, lean in unconsciously. It's not just theology, it's music, persuasion, spellcraft. You can see how a lonely queen, wrapped in suspicion and scrutiny, might find refuge in such a sound. The courtiers murmur about him. Some say he studied in Paris, devouring Augustine and Aristotle until his head was stuffed with philosophy. Others whisper he was born poor, the son of a miller, clawing his way up by sheer brilliance. Still others insist he's too polished, too sharp, as if ambition itself wears a cassock. Whatever the truth, he commands attention in ways few priests ever do. Soon he is at her side in official roles. During council meetings when nobles quarrel, his calm voice smooths the air. In disputes of law, his citations of canon text fall like iron weights on the table, ending arguments before they start. And when the Queen hesitates, torn between factions, it is often his advice she seeks with a subtle tilt of her head. You notice, though, that his eyes linger too long. Not in a vulgar way, never that, but in a way that suggests he is studying her more deeply than duty requires. The tilt of her chin when she argues, the way her fingers tighten around a parchment when anger stirs. He seems to know her already, to see through the jeweled robes to the woman beneath. Their first private meeting happens almost by accident. The Queen requests spiritual counsel after a particularly tense council, her enemies sniping louder than usual. The confessor follows her into the small side chamber reserved for personal devotions. You trail behind in imagination, watching the heavy door shut. Inside, the air is thick with frankincense. A crucifix hangs above, the Christ figure gazing downward in sorrow. The Queen kneels, lips moving in prayer. When she speaks aloud, her voice is softer than in council, more hesitant. She confesses her doubts, not sins of the flesh or greed, but doubts of rule, of loyalty, of God's favor. The priest listens intently, his hands folded. When he answers, it isn't with the stern scolding you expect. It is with reassurance. He reminds her of Deborah the prophetess, of Esther the queen, of Mary crowned in heaven. He tells her her crown is no accident but providence. His words settle into her like balm into a wound. Over the following weeks, their meetings multiply, at first always framed as confession or counsel, but the tone shifts. Her words grow less guarded. She shares frustrations with ministers, fears of rebellion, even moments of loneliness. He listens without judgment, nodding, sometimes smiling faintly, and when he speaks it is never with dismissal, but with acknowledgement. He makes her feel seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time since her coronation. You catch the change in her demeanour. After their meetings, she steps lighter, her shoulders less rigid. She laughs more easily at supper, even teases her ladies-in-waiting. The courtiers notice but misread it. They think she has simply found her confidence. Only you know she has found something far riskier. The confessor begins to enter her orbit outside chapel walls. He appears at banquets, sitting modestly but always within her line of sight. He walks beside her in the gardens, offering commentary on the Psalms while her ladies trail behind. He lingers at the edge of processions, his cassock swaying as her litter passes, his gaze fixed forward but his awareness tethered to her. One afternoon, in the scriptorium, he brings her a book. Not scripture, not theology, but a volume of poetry. Bernard of Clairvaux, cloaked in spiritual metaphor, but pulsing with longing. He reads aloud a passage about divine love that feels suspiciously like earthly desire. Her lips pressed together, eyes downcast, but you notice the faint flush on her cheek. She does not stop him. By now, servants have begun to whisper. They see too much, the late-night candles flickering in her chapel, the priest slipping through quiet corridors, the Queen smiling in ways they've never seen before. Rumour is a weed. Once it sprouts, it spreads quickly, watered by curiosity and envy, but for now, no one dares accuse openly. And so the bond deepens. The Queen is found in her confessor, not just a priest, not just a servant of God, but a mirror of herself, a man who speaks to her as though she is more than a symbol, more than a throne. For a ruler starved of sincerity, it is intoxicating. You watch her as she dismisses her ladies one evening, closing the heavy doors of her private chapel behind her. The priest waits inside, his face lit by a single candle. Their voices murmur in low tones, too soft for anyone outside to hear, but you know, with a certainty that makes your pulse quicken, that a line is about to be crossed. The candle sputters in the small side chapel, its glow trembling over stone walls worn smooth by centuries of whispered prayers. You slip in behind the Queen as she kneels, her veil falling forward, her lips barely moving, and beside her, as always now, kneels the priest, his cassock brushing the flagstones, his hands folded, his eyes lowered but never blind to her presence. At first it is ordinary. She murmurs the usual formula of confession, sins of pride, moments of anger, a few doubts about her worthiness as queen. His responses are calm, measured, holy, but the rhythm falters when she pauses, her breath catches. She lifts her head, and instead of the crucifix above, her eyes find his face. "You know me," she whispers. Better than any of them. It's a dangerous sentence. You can almost hear the rafters creak under its weight. He does not recoil, though. He tilts his head, and a faint smile bends his lips. Gentle, almost sorrowful, but unmistakably human. From that night on, the barrier between queen and priest begins to fray. Small gestures, invisible to most, are magnified in your view. Her hand lingers too long as he passes her up psalter. His voice softens when addressing her, even in public. When she walks into the chapel, he bows deeper than custom demands, and she lowers her gaze just enough to hide the spark in her eyes. You notice how the confessions change, no longer just a list of sins. They become conversations. She speaks of childhood memories of fear in the nights before her coronation, of the crushing solitude that haunts her bedchamber even when surrounded by attendants. He listens not as judge, but as confidant. Sometimes when her words falter, he supplies them, finishing her sentences like a man who knows the rhythm of her heart. One evening, the inevitable happens. She weeps, not for political defeat, not for sin, but for loneliness. Her voice cracks as she says, "I am surrounded by people, and yet I have no one." The priest reaches out, hesitant, then lays his hand on hers. You can almost hear heaven hold its breath. Their hands linger together on the carved wood of the prie-dieu. Fingers curl, not quite interlaced, but close enough that the meaning is clear. For a queen who has been starved of unguarded human touch, that contact is more powerful than an army. You half joke to yourself that medieval scandal didn't start with fireworks, it started with fingertips. The affair grows not through grand declarations, but through 1,000 such moments. A glance across the hall that lasts a heartbeat too long, a late-night candle lit in her chamber when everyone else is asleep, a parchment slipped into her hand with a verse of the Song of Songs carefully underlined. You know the one, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." Technically scripture, but we both know that's flirting with extra steps. She begins to bend her routine around him. After morning mass, she lingers until others leave, so they can share a word in private. During processions, she ensures he is within sight. At banquets, her laughter grows lighter when he is near, though the courtiers attribute it to wine. Only you can see the pattern. She is orbiting him now, as surely as the moon clings to the earth. And he? He is careful, painfully careful. Every act is cloaked in the language of devotion. When he praises her, it is framed as admiration for her piety. When he offers comfort, it is couched as spiritual counsel. But beneath the cassock, beneath the rosary beads, he is a man, and his eyes betray him. They soften when she speaks, harden when rivals belittle her, linger when her veil slips from her hair. You sense the danger mounting. In a world where kings could take mistresses without scandal, a queen's single misstep would be magnified into catastrophe. The irony doesn't escape you. Her body is considered the property of the realm, her fidelity not just personal but political. Yet here she is, allowing herself the smallest betrayals of ritual and expectation. The servants notice first. They always do. The chambermaid who sees the queen's eyes shining after confession. The page who delivers a sealed letter to the priest at odd hours. The guard who swears he glimpsed them walking alone in the garden at dusk. These fragments gather into rumor into suspicion. But for now, fear keeps tongues from wagging too loudly. Accusing a queen is no light matter. Still, secrecy demands its own rituals. You see how carefully they choreograph their closeness. Meetings arranged under the guise of confession, letters disguised as prayers, trusted attendants, sworn to silence with gifts of coin or promises of favor. The palace is a labyrinth, and they are learning every shadowed corner, every passage where two figures might vanish unseen. And yet, despite all the risk, despite the stakes, they cannot stop. For her, he is not just a priest, he is the first person who speaks to her as a woman rather than a throne. For him, she is not just a queen, she is the one soul who listens when he strips scripture of its armor and reveals his own doubts, his own desires. Their bond is now undeniable. It pulses beneath the ceremonies, beneath the politics, beneath the sermons, and though the rest of the court may not yet dare name it, You know as you watch her linger a fraction too long in his presence, that this is no longer a mere friendship. It is a fire, carefully hidden but already burning. The palace is not just stone and ceremony, it is also a web of eyes and ears, and yet, somehow, they have managed to carve out a secret world within it. You trail them as they begin weaving the delicate threads of secrecy that will allow their bond to grow unchecked. It starts small, a note folded into the binding of a prayer book, slipped into her hands by a trusted lady-in-waiting, a signal agreed upon. If a candle burns in the Queen's private oratory past midnight, the priest knows she waits. If he carries a certain psalter tucked under his arm during morning prayers, she knows he can meet her later in the day. Each gesture is ordinary enough to seem innocent, yet layered with meaning sharp enough to cut through the noise of court life. You can't help but admire the ingenuity. These two could teach modern spies a lesson. Forget invisible ink. They've got saints' feast days, candle flames, and coded psalms. Want to say meet me after dark? Just quote the verse about walking in the night, guided by the Lord's light. Everyone else nods along piously, but the Queen smiles because she knows exactly what it means. Trusted servants become accomplices. One chambermaid, rewarded with a necklace, ensures doors stay unlocked at certain hours. A palace guard given a purse of coins conveniently patrols elsewhere when the priest makes his way toward the Queen's apartments. Each new helper tightens the circle of silence, but also increases the danger. For in the palace, loyalty is bought as easily as betrayal. Their meetings are brief, often no more than whispers exchanged in the hush of a side chapel or a brush of hands as she leaves the confessional. Yet, these scraps of intimacy sustain them like bread and wine. To a woman trapped in ritual and scrutiny, a moment of genuine touch is a feast. To a man sworn to celibacy, a smile shared in secret is as intoxicating as a goblet of burgundy wine. Still, they must act with discipline. At banquets you watch her deliberately turn her gaze away, speaking instead to ambassadors or ladies, lest suspicion sharpen. He too plays his role, delivering sermons that thunder against temptation and sin, even as his eyes flicker to her across the hall. The hypocrisy is almost theatrical. You can't help but smirk at the irony. Here is a man railing against carnal weakness, while plotting midnight encounters with his queen. If sermons came with a disclaimer, his would read, "Do as I say, not as I sneak," and yet the secrecy is never perfect. Rumours bloom in the cracks. A lady swears she heard muffled voices behind the chapel screen at midnight. A page claims he saw the priest leaving the Queen's apartments, cloak hooded. Gossip spreads with the speed of spilled wine, soaking through corridors and courtyards. Still, none dare confront her openly. A queen is not to be accused lightly, and the risk of being wrong is career-ending or life-ending. But the danger only makes the bond grow stronger. You can see it in the way they carry themselves after each clandestine meeting. She glows with a calm the courtiers misinterpret as divine inspiration. He preaches with a fervour that convinces some he is touched by the Spirit. Only you know the truth. They are touched not by heaven, but by each other. Of course, secrecy has its costs. They sleep poorly, haunted by the fear of discovery. She lies awake listening for the creak of footsteps outside her chamber, terrified that tonight will be the night a servant betrays them. He kneels in his own quarters, whispering prayers for strength, then breaking off when desire drowns out devotion. The guilt gnaws at him, but the longing is stronger. He knows the commandments, the vows, the penalties, and yet when the candle flickers in her window he goes. They invent a lullabies. When questioned about his late-night absences, he claims he is called to minister to the sick. When courtiers wonder why the Queen spends so much time in prayer, she shrugs and says piety is the anchor of her reign. It works for now, but even you can see that every lie adds another crack to the fragile dam, holding back the flood. Still, secrecy becomes a kind of thrill. The risk sharpens each moment. A brush of fingers while handing her a missal feels electrifying because it might be seen. A whispered laugh in the cloister echoes louder because silence is demanded. You realize they are not merely surviving in secrecy, they are addicted to it. Like gamblers rolling dice in the dark, the danger itself is part of the allure. By now, their hidden world has grown so strong that the public one feels like theatre. She listens to petitions and signs decrees, but her mind drifts toward the next clandestine meeting. He blesses soldiers and administers sacraments, but his thoughts linger on the memory of her hand on his. The palace remains outwardly unchanged, but beneath its stone skin, two hearts beat in defiance of law, faith and reason. And you, watching, know the truth. No secret this large can remain hidden forever. The line between temptation and surrender finally buckles. You feel it one humid summer night when the air hangs thick with roses and sweat, when even the palace walls seem to drip with silence. The queen dismisses her ladies early, their silks rustling away down the corridor. The chamber is left in near darkness, a single candle struggling against the shadows, and then soft steps. The scrape of a door. The priest enters, his hood low, his eyes quick. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. They stand facing one another, the flame between them trembling. She could send him away. He could bow and retreat. But instead, she steps forward, her veil slipping from her hair, her voice barely audible. From that word onward, the nature of their bond changes. You can almost hear the vows breaking like glass. His hands, once folded in prayer, now lift to her shoulders. Her crown is not on her head, but on the table, its jewels staring coldly as if to remind them of the stakes. The crucifix above the bed seems to lean forward, judging, while their shadows blur together against the wall. It isn't some reckless dive into passion. At first it is tentative, a brush of lips on knuckles, a forehead leaned against another in silence. But those small gestures carry more charge than any fiery sermon. Each one chips away at the fortress of restraint, and soon enough, restraint crumbles. Afterward, they sit in silence. She leans against him, her breath steadying, her hair loose and damp against his cassock. He stares into the dying candle, guilt already gnawing. "We are damned," he whispers. She only smiles faintly, exhaustion softening her voice. "Then let us be damned together." The irony stings. Tomorrow he will stand in the pulpit and thunder against the sins of the flesh. Tomorrow she will wear her crown and radiate divine authority. Yet tonight they are simply a man and a woman, clutching at forbidden solace. You can't help but think of the medieval chroniclers, who will one day whisper this scandal in ink, turning their stolen intimacy into a weapon of history. Their secret, however, cannot remain a single night's transgression. One taste leads to another. You watch as patterns form. Late-night candles flickering with suspicious regularity. The queen's laughter growing warmer, her eyes brighter, her weariness eased in ways only you understand. The priest, once solemn and detached, begins to glow with a restless energy, his sermons more passionate, his gaze sharper. Of course, guilt gnaws at him. He kneels for hours, muttering penances under his breath, scourging himself with cords when no one watches. Yet even as the welts rise, his thoughts return to her touch, and she, though aware of the danger, refuses regret. For the first time in her reign, she feels human rather than caged. For the first time in her life she is loved not as a queen, but as a woman. You smirk at the absurdity of it. A queen and her priest, crafting their own private gospel of sin. If medieval theatre had dared put this on stage, audiences would have laughed it off as unbelievable. Yet here it is, unfolding before your eyes, real as the wax dripping from the candle. But every secret has witnesses. The servants notice the flush in her cheeks at dawn. Guards notice the priest's late returns to his chambers. Rumours creep again through the corridors. Some whisper she is possessed, others that he is bewitched. Still, no one dares confront them, not yet. For now their stolen moments remain hidden behind heavy doors and whispered prayers. And so the affair continues, each meeting more dangerous, more intoxicating than the last. Their love, or their folly, depending on your view, has crossed from longing into reality. And though they cling to secrecy, you know with a certainty that makes your chest tighten, this is the point of no return. The palace, once a cage, now feels like a stage set for a dangerous play. You notice how carefully the queen and her priest choreograph every move, every whisper, every glance. Secrecy has become a second crown she wears, heavier than gold, sharper than jewels. By day, the charade remains flawless. She presides over councils with calm authority, her face smooth as marble. He preaches with conviction, his voice carrying across the hall like thunder. To the casual eye, nothing has changed. But you, watching from the hidden corners, see the signals flicker like sparks in dry straw. A hand brushing too close when he passes her a scroll. A pause in her step when she catches his gaze across the chapel. A faint smile tugging at lips that ought to be solemn. The system of secrecy grows more elaborate. The queen has a chest of letters, written in Latin so dense that any curious servant would mistake them for theology. In truth, each line drips with longing masked as devotion. "Your words are my psalms," he writes. "Your presence my sacrament." She replies with passages from the Song of Songs, safely shielded by the veil of Scripture, its spiritual camouflage, love poetry hiding in plain sight. They rely on a network of trusted intermediaries. A lady in waiting delivers folded parchment beneath trays of figs. A guard coughs twice at the end of a corridor to signal it's clear. Even the palace cats play their role, slinking in and out of rooms at night, their sudden movements masking the sound of furtive footsteps. You joke to yourself that if MI6 ever invents time travel, they'll hire these servants first. Still, danger presses closer. The Queen's rivals are not fools. They sense something amiss. The Duke of Artois raises an eyebrow when the priest is always present at private suppers. The Bishop of Rouen mutters about too much intimacy between crown and cassock. A Venetian ambassador writes home of strange warmth between queen and confessor. The walls themselves seem to buzz with suspicion, and yet the secrecy holds for now, because both play their roles so well. The queen masks desire with dignity, turning every blush into piety, every smile into majesty. The priest cloaks passion with sermons, each word a shield against the probing eyes of his brothers in cloth. But you know as well as I do, no mask lasts forever. They have grown bold enough to invent a libelize. When she disappears from a banquet early, it is said she has a headache. When he is absent from matins, he claims to have been called to the infirmary. These lies become routine, worn smooth like prayer beads in restless fingers, yet each one chips at their souls, a tally of deceit that grows heavier with time. The queen begins to look different. You notice how her eyes shine brighter, how her smile comes easier. The courtiers whisper that she must be blessed, that God himself has renewed her spirit. If only they knew. The priest, too, changes. His once gaunt face softens. His sermons glow with strange new energy. Some call it divine inspiration. You know it's something else entirely. And yet, behind the glow, you sense the tightening coil of fear. Every secret rendezvous might be the one that ends them. Every note might fall into the wrong hands. Every whisper might be overheard by a servant eager for gold. They know this. But still they go on. The fire has grown too hot to smother. You imagine her crown sitting heavy on its velvet cushion, while she leans against his shoulder in the shadows, whispering words she cannot speak in daylight. You imagine his rosary dangling from his belt while his hands reach for her fingers, trembling not with devotion, but with desire. It is a life of constant hiding, constant risk, constant deceit, and yet paradoxically it is also the freest either of them has ever felt. The irony is sharp enough to slice the air. The very priest who thunders from the pulpit about sin now spends his nights breaking the vows he preaches. You watch him step up to the lectern, cassock swaying, Bible in hand, his voice rising like a storm. He warns against temptation, against the lusts of the flesh, against the serpent's whisper that lures souls into damnation. The courtiers nod solemnly, the villagers cross themselves, and the queen sits stiffly in her carved chair, her eyes fixed on the floor. She knows every word of this sermon is aimed at her heart, and still she listens, her pulse quickening with every warning. It would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous. You half want to lean over and whisper, "Practice what you preach, Father," but of course you bite your tongue. The hypocrisy is a cloak, carefully sewn, and it keeps them safe, for now. The queen herself learns to play the game. In public, she doubles down on piety. Donations to monasteries increase. Processions grow longer and more ornate. She fasts more strictly, kneels more humbly, recites more prayers. The court begins to murmur that their sovereign is the most devout monarch in generations. No one suspects, or rather no one dares say aloud, that this radiant display of holiness is born not of God but of guilt. Behind closed doors, though, the contrast is stark. The crucifix in her chamber becomes a silent witness, watching as vows dissolve. The rosary beads he fingers during Mass are the same that brush against her skin when his hands tremble at night. They live in two worlds at once, one of sacred ritual, one of forbidden intimacy. The friction between them creates sparks, and those sparks set fire to their very souls. The priest struggles visibly. You see him scourging himself in secret, striking his back until welts rise, whispering frantic prayers through clenched teeth. He believes he is purging the sin, but you know he is only feeding the cycle guilt, leading back to desire, desire leading back to guilt. His sermons grow more fiery, almost manic, as though shouting louder will silence the voice of his conscience. Court politics sharpen the blade of hypocrisy. The church demands her presence constantly. At feast days, relic veneration, saintly processions. She smiles, sings hymns, kisses relics, all while knowing she has broken the very commandments these ceremonies uphold. The irony does not escape her, but she wears it like armor. If holiness is what the world demands, she will provide a spectacle of holiness greater than any before. But the cracks are there. You see her falter during confession, her hands trembling as she mouths words of repentance, while her heart races with memory. You see him hesitate at the altar, his eyes flicking toward her when he should be focused on the chalice. The tension is unbearable. It is as if both are waiting for a thunderclap of divine punishment. And when it does not come, they take the silence as permission to continue. And yet, even silence can betray. The courtiers watch, the clergy gossip, the servants whisper. Hypocrisy cannot remain hidden forever. The louder his sermons, the more suspicious they sound. The holier her donations, the more hollow they ring. You know it is only a matter of time before someone puts the pieces together. Still, for now, the play continues. By day, sermons thunder and crowns gleam. By night, whispers curl through the dark like incense smoke. And between them, the unspoken truth. They have built their love on the very hypocrisy that may one day destroy them. Whispers travel faster than any courier. You hear them rustle first among the servants, hushed voices behind the laundry lines, sideways glances exchanged while polishing silver. A chambermaid swears she saw the priest leaving the queen's apartments at dawn. A guard mutters that her candle burns suspiciously late in the oratory. No one says it outright, but the fragments add up, like tiles forming a dangerous mosaic. The courtiers are sharper still. They thrive on scandal the way bees thrive on nectar. The Duke of Artois leans across the table at supper, murmuring jokes about pious queens and their confessors' council. The Venetian ambassador scratches quill to parchment, sending coded reports back to his masters about unseemly familiarity between crown and cassock. Even the ladies in waiting, loyal though they may be, exchange nervous smiles when the queen blushes at the sound of a certain voice. It is in the corridors that rumour becomes wildfire. A servant whispers to a page, the page whispers to a knight, the knight whispers to a baron, and soon the entire palace hums with suspicion. You imagine the gossip bubbling beneath the gilded ceilings like a cauldron ready to boil over. The queen knows it too. You see her stiffen at banquets, her laughter a beat too forced, her gaze darting more often toward the priest, to reassure herself that the mask still holds. He, for his part, tries to smother his unease with fiercer sermons, but the harder he rails against sin, the more convincing the whispers become. Hypocrisy, after all, makes excellent gossip fodder. Ambassadors seize the chance to weaponize rumour. The English envoy hints slyly that his king would be most concerned if holiness at this court proved less than spotless. A papal legate raises an eyebrow at the queen's extraordinary devotion to one particular priest. Enemies across the realm sharpen their daggers, knowing that nothing undermines authority faster than scandal. And yet, scandal thrives precisely because secrecy fuels it. Nobody has proof. They have hints, glances, murmurs, but no letter, No witness bold enough to stand in open court. For now, the Queen's crown gleams untarnished, though it sits on a head that knows every smile in the room might mask betrayal. You can almost hear the ticking of the trap. A misplaced letter, a careless servant, one unlucky stumble, and the whispers will become accusations. She knows it, he knows it, and yet neither can stop. If anything, the risk binds them tighter. Desire doesn't fade under threat. It deepens. Like wine left too long in the cask, secrecy has made their bond richer, heavier, more intoxicating. The palace becomes a theatre of glances. At Mass her eyes flick to him as the choir sings, and though dozens kneel between them, the distance feels charged. At council, his measured tone steadies her as nobles bicker, and though no one notices, her hand relaxes against the throne when he speaks. At feasts, when laughter roars around them, their silence says more than a dozen songs. The irony gnaws at you. They are the worst kept secret, and yet the best hidden affair. Everyone suspects, yet no one dares prove. Everyone whispers, yet no one dares shout. It's as if the entire court is complicit in a scandal they cannot quite name, but danger sharpens with each passing day. Rival factions fan the flames, clerics mutter about morality, and foreign powers lick their lips at the chance to discredit her reign. You know the pattern. Rumours never vanish. They grow teeth, and soon, whispers will no longer be enough. They will demand blood. For now, though, the Queen walks the palace halls with her head high, crown gleaming, smile calm. The priest bows at her side, cassock rustling, sermon ready. But beneath the polished surface, you feel the walls themselves listening, waiting. The palace knows, and once stone learns a secret, it never forgets. The whispers finally grow teeth, and they bite deep into politics. You see it first in council. A noble clears his throat, too loudly, before suggesting that holy men ought not to linger so near the Queen's ear. The words drip with venom disguised as concern. Another follows, warning that excessive influence from the clergy could compromise the realm's alliances. Their meaning is clear. The crown itself is at risk if she appears too entangled with her priest. The Queen's jaw tightens. She responds with regal calm, insisting that her confessor merely guides her conscience, as is proper for any Christian sovereign. But you notice her knuckles whiten on the arm of her throne. The attack has begun, not with swords, but with insinuations. Beyond the council chamber, the rumours are wielded as weapons. The Duke of Artois whispers to foreign envoys that the Queen's judgment is clouded by private devotions. The papal legate, sniffing scandal, hints that Rome may demand inquiries. Even her allies grow uneasy. Who wants to tie their fortunes to a throne shadowed by disgrace? You can almost see the alliances loosening like knots soaked in water. Succession, too, becomes a sharpened blade. Rivals claim that if the Queen is compromised, her children's legitimacy may be questioned. A son born under scandal is easy prey for ambitious cousins and dukes. The murmur is subtle but dangerous. Perhaps the dynasty itself could be usurped if her virtue is proven false. And yet, the Queen does not retreat. Instead, she pushes forward, doubling her involvement in statecraft, as if to drown out the whispers with action. She orders new fortifications along the border, raises levies to strengthen the army, and summons ambassadors with bold proposals. Her reign becomes sharper, more decisive. You realize she is trying to prove, perhaps to herself as much as others, that love has not made her weak. The priest, however, is less adept at disguise. His influence is obvious, his counsel too often echoed in her decrees. You see him standing beside her during audiences, his presence too close for comfort. Nobles exchange glances, lips curling in smirks. The more he appears by her side, the easier it is for enemies to paint him as puppet master and her as puppet. Foreign courts delight in the scandal. Pamphlets handwritten, smuggled, dangerous circulate in secret. Mocking verses about the Queen and her confessor. Ambassadors pen reports that drip with sarcasm, noting her excessive devotion. The scandal contained within palace walls is one thing. A scandal whispered across borders is another. Her political enemies seize their moment. They call for greater oversight of the crown, for noble councils to limit her authority, for clerical supervision of her decisions. What began as whispers of adultery becomes fuel for political revolution. You know the pattern. Personal scandal becomes public leverage. One private sin threatens to topple a kingdom. And yet, even under this storm, she does not release him. If anything, their bond tightens. The more the world pushes against them, the more fiercely they cling to one another. You can see it in their eyes during mass defiance burning where fear should be. It's reckless, it's dangerous, but it's also undeniably human. Still, you can't ignore the shifting tide. Once she was a queen with a scandal. Now, the scandal is beginning to define her reign, and though she holds her head high, you sense the crown slipping, tilting beneath the weight of whispers that have become weapons. Politics has sharpened the affair into a blade, and blades, as you know, always draw blood in the end. The church does not take scandal lightly, and soon its shadow looms larger than any duke or ambassador. You watch the bishops gather like storm clouds, their robes heavy, their expressions carved with disapproval. They speak in veiled terms at first, letters to the queen reminding her of her sacred duty, sermons warning vaguely against Eves who tempt holy men. But beneath the politeness is a clear message. Rome is watching. The papal legate sharpens the tone. He stands in the council chamber, voice cold, eyes fixed on the queen. Your Majesty's reign, he intones, must be spotless before God. Any stain, even a whisper, imperils not only your soul, but your throne. The words echo like iron struck on stone. Everyone in the room hears the unspoken accusation. The confessor, once confident in his pulpit, begins to falter. His sermons grow defensive, almost desperate, filled with fire and brimstone, as though sheer volume might drown suspicion. He prays longer, fasts harder, punishes his own body with scourges. You see the guilt gnawing at him. Yet still he goes when her candle burns at night. The paradox is almost cruel. The more the church condemns, the more he clings to her in secret. Clerical pressure mounts. Bishops petition the Pope to intervene. Monks write treatises condemning women who seduce priests under guise of confession. In monasteries, whispers spread that the Queen's sin might invite God's wrath upon the entire realm. The more the story grows, the less it is about two people, and the more it becomes a cosmic drama of sin and punishment. Rome, ever political, weighs its options. If the Queen bends, publicly repents, and dismisses her confessor, the matter can be buried. If she resists, the Church has weapons sharper than swords: excommunication, interdiction, the denial of sacraments to an entire kingdom. Imagine every church locked, every mass silenced, every grave unblessed. Her subjects would not forgive her for that. The Queen knows this threat. You see her lips tighten when the legate delivers his warnings, yet she does not flinch. My conscience is clear, she replies coolly, her voice steady. It is a lie so bold it almost sounds like truth. The priest, however, begins to crack. Alone in his chambers, he whispers that he should leave, that his presence endangers not only his soul, but the stability of the crown. But when he stands before her, his resolve melts. She reaches for his hand, and all his vows, his fears, his sermons collapse like sandcastles in the tide. Clerics push harder. A synod is called, its agenda thinly veiled, to discuss the moral health of the court. Pamphlets circulate, some so cruel they describe her as a Jezebel who leads priests to ruin. The Church's anger is no longer whispered, it is shouted, and still she refuses to yield. You marvel at her audacity. Where most monarchs would beg absolution, she doubles down, commissioning new altarpieces, endowing monasteries, walking barefoot in public processions. To the crowds, it looks like unmatched piety. To the bishops, it is defiance wrapped in gold leaf. But you see the truth. Every prayer, every donation, every procession is a shield. The Queen hides her sin behind a fortress of ritual, hoping no arrow of accusation can pierce it. Yet the walls grow thinner by the day. The Church has drawn its battle lines. The Queen will not repent. The priest will not leave. And the stage is set for exposure, louder, harsher and more dangerous than ever before. Secrets don't collapse all at once. They unravel thread by thread until suddenly the whole fabric is gone. You see the first loose thread one rainy night, when a letter slips from the Queen's prayer book. A servant, tasked with tidying, stoops to pick it up. Her eyes skim just enough Latin to know it isn't ordinary scripture. The words, "Your lips are my sacrament," scorch her thoughts. She tucks the letter back quickly, but her silence is not loyalty. It is fear, and fear is easily bought. Soon after, another slip. The priest, exhausted after days of fasting, fails to lock the side door of the chapel. A guard on patrol stumbles upon shadows moving inside. He does not speak, not yet, but the image clings to him like a curse. Queen and confessor too close in the darkness, whispering words no liturgy contains. Rumour, once smoke, now finds sparks. A lady in waiting vanishes from court, dismissed suddenly with no explanation. Whispers say she saw too much. A merchant claims he carried sealed letters between the palace and a monastery. Letters addressed in a hand suspiciously like the Queen's. None of these scraps would stand alone, but together they weave a net, tightening around them both. The rivals seize their chance. In council, the Duke of Artois drops a folded parchment onto the table. An intercepted note, half-burned, yet legible enough to sting. "I burn with longing, yet God forgives when I touch your hand." Gasps ripple through the chamber. The Queen's face remains stone, but her pulse drums loud enough for you to hear. She denies, of course, dismisses it as forgery, but the seed is planted. The church presses harder. A papal envoy arrives, parchment in hand, demanding an inquiry into the confessor's conduct. For the sake of the realm's soul, he declares, truth must be known. The words are sanctified daggers. Everyone knows what he means. The affair is no longer rumour. It is accusation. The Queen clings to defiance. She stages more acts of devotion, kneeling barefoot in processions, funding a new abbey, parading relics through the streets. Crowds cheer, convinced of her holiness. But behind palace walls, confidence cracks. You see it in the trembling of her hands, in the sleepless shadows beneath her eyes. The priest suffers more visibly. His sermons falter, his voice hoarse, his gaze darting nervously. He avoids the other clergy, retreats into silence, yet still he cannot leave her. One night you hear him whisper, "If we are discovered, I will take the blame." She shakes her head, eyes blazing. "No, if they destroy you, they destroy me too. It is only a matter of time before the final slip comes. Perhaps it will be another letter, perhaps a servant bribed by gold, perhaps a rival emboldened by the Pope's backing. But you know as well as I do, their secret has passed its last twilight. The dawn of exposure is already breaking, and in that dawn, you can almost hear the drumbeat of judgment. The summons comes like a hammer blow, an inquiry convened, clerics and nobles gathered, parchment spread across a long oak table that smells of wax and sweat. You are there, standing against the wall, as the Queen takes her place on the throne and her confessor stands before her, not as priest, not as lover, but as accused. The air is thick with tension. Bishops in crimson robes clear their throats, eyes gleaming with zeal. Nobles lean forward, eager for spectacle, for weakness, for power to shift. The papal envoy presides, his face solemn, his quill poised. The charge is read, in proper familiarity between Her Majesty the Queen and her confessor, to the scandal of the church and the danger of the realm. The Queen rises, her voice calm but sharp. "These whispers are lies, born of envy," she declares. "I kneel before God alone. My confessor has been my guide. Nothing more." Her words ripple across the hall, firm as iron, but you sense the strain behind them. She knows denial is her only shield. The priest, too, is questioned. His answers tremble on the line between truth and lie. "I have offered counsel, prayers, guidance," he says. "I have been devoted to her soul, as is my sacred duty." His gaze flicks toward her, only for a heartbeat, but it is enough. The room catches it, and the silence that follows is louder than any confession. Witnesses are called. A servant admits to seeing him slip through the corridors at night. A guard swears he found him in the chapel past midnight. A discarded letter, charred but legible, is produced and read aloud. The words echo in the vaulted chamber. "Your lips are my sacrament." Gasps, whispers, a shuffle of feet. The queen's face does not move, but her hands clench white against her gown. The bishops press harder. "These are not the actions of holiness," one thunders. "This is sin that stains throne and altar alike." The papal envoy nods gravely. The pressure is relentless. You can almost feel the walls closing in. And yet, she does not yield. She insists the letters are forgeries. The witnesses liars bought by rivals. She wraps herself in the armor of sovereignty, reminding them that a queen answers to God alone. Her defiance stuns even her enemies. For a moment, the hall wavers, unsure whether to condemn or to retreat. But politics is unforgiving. Rivals press for harsher measures. Some demand her abdication, others the exile of the priest, others even whisper of annulment of her crown. The church wields the threat of excommunication, dangling it like a sword. Imagine the kingdom plunged into darkness, masses silenced, sacraments withheld, all because of her. The inquiry drags on for hours, days, each session grinding her defences thinner. The priest falters first. Under pressure his voice cracks. He admits to undue closeness, though he skirts the word sin. His attempt at half-truth satisfies no one. It is enough to damn him, yet not enough to shield her. The court roars with whispers. The confessor has confessed. The queen does not break, not fully. She glares at her accusers, her voice still sharp as steel. "You mistake devotion for desire, counsel for corruption. You seek to break me because I am a woman crowned." The words ring powerful, but you can feel the tide against her. Denial may protect her crown, but it cannot protect him. Judgment hangs in the air like a blade, suspended but ready to fall. And as the inquiry closes, you realize the outcome is no longer about truth. It is about power. And in power games, someone always bleeds. The verdict comes swift for the priest, because unlike a queen, he has no crown to shield him. You watch as he is stripped of office, his robes torn from his shoulders, the symbol of his priesthood cast aside in front of the assembly. The bishops intone prayers of cleansing, but their eyes gleam with something closer to triumph than sorrow. He is condemned, though not to death, for spilling royal secrets is dangerous even for the church. Instead, exile. He will be sent to a remote monastery, a frozen stone outpost far from the capital, where silence and hunger will be his only companions. It is punishment enough to bury a man alive in prayer and solitude, severing him from the queen who was his reason for breathing. The crowd whispers as guards lead him away. Some smirk at his downfall, others shake their heads with pity. A few, very few, glance at the queen, wondering if she is widow or accomplice. She sits rigid, her hands clasped so tightly they might break. Not a flicker of expression crosses her face, but you feel the tremor beneath the mask. Before he leaves, there is one final moment. At dawn in the courtyard, the queen descends from her chambers under pretense of inspecting the guards. He is there, bound for the cart that will take him into exile. Their eyes meet. Neither speaks. Neither dares move closer, but in that silence, whole volumes are exchanged. Regret, longing, apology, defiance, a final confession without words, and then he is gone. The cart rattles away, hooves striking sparks from the cobbles. The sound fades, and with it goes the man who once gave her laughter, comfort, and peril in equal measure. The palace is quieter now, but the quiet is not peace. It is hollow, like a chapel after the candles have burned out. The queen survives, but the cost is clear. Courtiers breathe easier without the priest's shadow. Bishops return to their duties, smug in victory. Rivals smile behind their hands, satisfied that scandal has clipped her wings. Yet you know what they do not. She is wounded, not destroyed. Her crown remains, but the woman beneath has been stripped bare. For the priest, life shrinks to silence. He chants psalms in the cold dawn, tills rocky soil, kneels until his knees bleed. But in the stillness of his cell, memories intrude. The warmth of her hand, the echo of her laughter. He prays for forgiveness, but what he really prays for is her. Even in exile, her shadow lies across his cell like a beam of impossible light. For her, life becomes theatre once more. She appears at Mass with more solemnity than ever, leads processions with a crown heavy enough to hide the emptiness inside. Her people cheer her piety, her nobles respect her discipline. But when the doors close at night, she sits alone by the candle, staring at the empty chair across from her desk. The silence is unbearable. The affair is officially ended, the priest punished, the queen purified, yet the truth lingers like smoke that no incense can drive out. You sense it in the way her eyes linger on the crucifix, not in devotion, but in defiance, in the way her prayers falter, half to God, half to a man she will never see again. His fate is sealed, hers still balanced. But both know one thing: exile may part bodies, but memory never obeys judgment. And in memory, they are still together, still whispering in the dark, still daring to believe that love could bloom in the shadow of a crown and a cross. The throne room looks the same as it always has, columns rising high into vaulted ceilings, banners shifting with drafts, courtiers shuffling like pieces on a board. But to you it feels hollow now. The queen sits on her carved chair of state, the crown gleaming on her head, the scepter steady in her hand, and yet you know it is all performance. The priest is gone, exiled beyond the reach of her gaze, and though she wears her regalia with the precision of ritual, her eyes carry a weight that no jewel can hide. Her downfall does not arrive as a single thunderclap. It comes as a slow erosion, a crumbling of stone from within. At first she maintains her power. Nobles bend the knee, ambassadors deliver their gifts, the army obeys her commands. Outwardly, nothing has changed. But you, watching closely, see how cracks spread beneath the surface. Every decision she makes is now doubted. When she approves new taxes, courtiers mutter that she is greedy. When she hesitates on a treaty, rivals sneer that she is indecisive. If she smiles, they say she hides guilt. If she frowns, they claim she despairs. It no longer matters what she does. Every gesture is interpreted through the lens of scandal. Her enemies do not need proof anymore. Suspicion has become its own kind of evidence. The church, satisfied with the priest's exile, pretends magnanimity. Bishops praise her for renewed devotion. Papal letters arrive, blessing her reign. Processions swell with chants of loyalty. But you know this is not forgiveness. It is surveillance. Every prayer she utters is now measured, every donation scrutinized, every mass a test. The church has clipped her wings, and though she still flies, the skies are smaller. The court never forgets. Whispered jokes drift through banquet halls, tales of queens who confessed more than sins, of priests whose sermons were sweeter than wine. They never name her outright, but everyone knows. Laughter is softer when she enters the room, but not gone. Silence falls in her wake, but not respect. She is queen, yes, but a queen diminished by rumour that will not die. And yet, for years, she endures. You follow her as she rules with a firmness born of necessity. She strengthens the treasury, reforms the courts, sponsors scholars. She governs as if her life depends on it, because it does. Each decree, each act of justice, is a stone placed to shore up a wall that scandal eroded. Her resilience impresses even her enemies. She becomes, paradoxically, both weakened by the affair and hardened by survival. But loneliness gnaws at her. At night, in her private chamber, she sits before her desk, the same desk where once letters lay hidden beneath psalms. The candle burns low, and she stares into the flame as if it might conjure him. Sometimes she writes, quill scratching furiously across parchment, words spilling out like confession. She signs no name, seals no crest. The letters pile up in a locked chest, messages to no one, or to a man who will never read them. Her ladies find her sleepless more often than not. Your Majesty, they murmur, you must rest. She waves them off, eyes hollow. In dreams, perhaps, she meets him again. In waking, she meets only duty. The palace is full of people, yet she walks its halls as if haunted, and perhaps she is. Haunted by footsteps that no longer echo beside hers, haunted by prayers whispered in the dark. The years pass. The priest grows old in his distant monastery, his hair silver, his back bent. He chants psalms at dawn, tills fields at noon, kneels at dusk. To his brothers, he is a penitent, a man chastened by sin, but you know better. At night, when silence wraps the cloister, he presses his forehead to the cold stone wall and remembers her, her voice, her laughter, the way she once said, "Stay." No vow, no exile, no prayer has erased her. Memory is the sin he cannot scourge away. For the queen, time is less forgiving. Scandal leaves scars deeper than war. Her children grow, marry, and take their places in the realm, but her rivals never cease to remind them of her shame. When ambassadors negotiate, they recall her weakness. When nobles quarrel, they invoke her sins. She becomes a cautionary tale, her name whispered with pity or contempt, rarely with admiration. And yet her legend also takes root. In villages, peasants murmur of a queen who dared love, who dared defy both throne and altar. Ballads are sung in secret, casting her not as Jezebel, but as tragic heroine. Children sneak into chapels and whisper stories of the queen who loved her priest, half scandal, half romance. History is never one story. It is a chorus of contradictions. You notice how, near the end, she ceases to resist the whispers. She no longer flinches when courtiers joke, no longer stiffens when bishops lecture. Instead, she moves through the palace like one who has already paid the price. There is a strange freedom in it, as if by surviving disgrace, she has learned that nothing more can truly wound her. One final time, she walks the palace gardens at dusk. The roses bloom as they once did when secrecy was young, when footsteps on gravel meant danger and thrill. She pauses beneath the arbor, her hand resting on a stone bench. For a moment her lips move in silence. Not prayer, not command, but memory. Then she turns back toward the palace, her crown gleaming in the fading light, her shoulders square. Her downfall is not execution, not exile, not abdication. It is subtler, crueler, the erosion of trust, the hollowing of reputation, the loneliness of a life lived under suspicion. She keeps her throne, but loses the one person who saw her not as a queen, but as a woman, and perhaps that is the harsher fate. You stand with her in her final years, when her hair has silvered and her steps slowed. She sits by the fire, hands folded in her lap, the crown set aside. Courtiers still bow, ambassadors still flatter, but she smiles faintly, as if amused by the emptiness of it all. She whispers, almost to herself, "A crown is a cage, and love was the key I should not have turned." When she dies, the chronicles record her reign in the usual tones, her wars, her taxes, her laws. Some scribes add the scandal, some omit it, but the people remember. In taverns, ballads of the queen and her priest are sung with wine-soaked voices. In monasteries, warnings are preached against lust that destroys kingdoms, and in whispers long after her bones have turned to dust, the tale survives. History is cruel, but also tender. It reduces her to a lesson and raises her to a legend in the same breath. And you, who have walked with her through the corridors of secrecy, through the whispers and trials, know the truth is both simpler and sadder. She was a woman who longed for love, and a priest who longed for her. Together they defied the world, and together they were broken by it. Now, let the noise of scandal fade like the tolling of a distant bell. Let the marble halls and the whispering courtiers dissolve into silence. You are left not with a queen or a priest, but with two human hearts, fragile, flawed, longing for connection where none was allowed. Breathe slowly, letting the weight of their story settle into stillness. The crown is gone, the cassock folded away, the voices of bishops and rivals silenced. What remains is memory, soft and flickering, like a candle flame sheltered against the dark. Imagine her, at last, resting free from rumour, her hands unclasped, her gaze no longer sharp with suspicion. Imagine him, no longer scouring himself with guilt, his lips no longer trembling with sermons. In death they are both released, no longer queen and confessor, but simply souls, quiet together in the hush of eternity. The scandal, the whispers, the judgments, all of it fades. History has had its say, but here, in this quiet moment, you can choose to remember them not as sinners or saints, but as people who risked everything for love, and who carried that love even when it became their undoing. So let your breath soften, let your body grow heavy against the sheets, and know that the story has ended. Sleep now, with the assurance that even in history's harshest tales, there is always tenderness hidden beneath the cracks. Good night, sweet dreams.